What is an example of the butterfly effect that happened in your life? Around 5 years ago I was going to live in Australia for around a year. As part of a student exchange program. I would have been able to leave for Australia earlier. But I had troubles organizing my visa. The visa couldn't come from my national government for some reason. And had to go through the German bureaucracy. The delay meant that I had to leave 1 week later than originally planned. I had to reschedule flights. Which was a large nuisance at the time. The original flight I would have been on would have been flight MH17 from Amsterdam to Kuala Lumpur that was shot down with a rocket above Ukraine by pro-Russian separatists. Everybody on that flight had died. I took flight MH19 instead. Thanks to the delay caused by slow bureaucracy. I would have died had I gotten my visa on time. I had a crush on a guy when I was in 5th grade. He was a grade ahead of me. I finally told my parents about the crush. They ended up befriending crush's parents. My dad started working for crush's dad. My dad borrowed crush's dad's work van for a job and went to return it and then ride his bike home. He fell off his bike during that ride and died 2 weeks later. My mom, a few months later, starts having an affair with crush's dad, who was and still is married. That was 16 years ago and it's still going on. Drunkenly agreed at a party the night before to go visit my friend's parents with him the next day in a city 200 miles away. It turned out another friend lived close by, so we all met for drinks that evening, and said other's friend's sister happened to be visiting him for the weekend. She came to meet us as she'd not seen me for a few years. We got drunk. Friend left early as he had work the next day. His sister didn't. And 9 years later we are married with 2 kids. A series of events which, had one of any part not happened, would have significantly altered the course of my life. This one is pretty literal, but I was walking in a state park when this iridescent blue butterfly sat down on the path in front of me. I decided to squat down to get a better look at it, and as I did, a huge 15-foot tree branch fell down a few steps ahead of me on the trail where I would have been had I not stopped to say, "Oh hello butterfly." Mum and father split when I had turned 15. Father remarried a few years later, and with that I had a step family. I put a good word in for my now stepsister where I worked. She was cool, so thought I'd help her out. A few months later her friend is looking for work and she puts a good work in for her. Her friends joins our workplace. I now have 2 children with her friend and couldn't be happier, with our own marriage to come very soon. Literally blows my mind to think that if my parents never split, I wouldn't have found my soulmate. This happened the other day. I went to go pick up some weed from my buddy. As I'm driving back home he calls me asking if his keys are in my truck. I tell him to hold on, I'll pull over and look and call him back. I get off the highway. As I'm getting off the highway, the car ahead of me but to the left merged into my lane and clipped the person ahead of me, causing an accident. If I had stayed on the highway I would have been involved in that accident most likely. My weed dealer losing his keys in my truck led to me not being in a wreck. I dropped dead at work 15 minutes after arriving. I was given CPR by co-workers and the paramedics got my heart working again. 3 weeks later, I'm out of the hospital and making a full recovery. Had this happened 15 minutes earlier, I'd have been in my car and possibly killed someone. 15 minutes later, I might be walking to get coffee and drop dead in the middle of the street. This was a job I had not planned on keeping very long, as I freelance and was in the midst of a slow season. This job is also the first job to give me health insurance in 15 years. Every single thing I did in my life up until that point, every alcoholic drink, every cigarette in college, every toke of pot and night shift, and every cheeseburger, got my heart to stop at the best possible moment, surrounded by the best possible people. 6 years ago I decided to stay home instead of going to class because I was feeling sick. I was bored out of my mind and opened the app store on my iPad to look for a game to download. For some reason I still don't know, there was a karaoke app in the recommended section. I had never done karaoke, never sung in front of anyone before or let anyone hear me sing. For that matter, It took me about 4 months just to gather the courage to actually use it and sing because I've always been self-conscious about my voice. I made a lot of friends and sang a bunch. One of these friends showed me a song. Just because it was in Spanish, my first language, from a user I didn't know or follow, I knew the song. But I never liked it, so I didn't give it much thought and didn't sing it. The next day I remembered about it and said, "Duck it. I'll sing it anyways just because it's in Spanish." As soon as I heard her voice I melted and fell in love with it. She thanked me for joining and that was it. Fast forward to today. I married the woman with a Spanish song I almost didn't sing. Moved to another country. Adopted a cat and I'm happier than I've ever been. I'm still amazed that the simplest decision I made out of boredom changed my whole life. Edit, added details. When I first applied to a community college, they rejected me because I had only partially completed high school. This was a special college for adults and you didn't need a full high school diploma and I had misread how much I needed to have completed, so I gave up on education. Again. Seeing as I had been nothing but a failure in academia when I used to go to school. My mom was having none of it. She called the school and somehow convinced them to let me in. Probably told them about my crippling depression and how much I needed this. Turns out I wasn't bad at this academia thing. It was 7 years ago and I'm finishing medical school next year with all of my research and hopefully residency in neurosurgery after. I also met Miso at this school as she was visiting her friend who I went to class with. And we have a beautiful son together. Had my mom not decided to make that phone call, I would be living an entirely different life. If I would be living at all, I wasn't kidding about that depression. It was quite severe. While in high school I came across a post in an online forum that mentioned a university in another country. Looked up the place and immediately found a course that I found interesting. After finishing high school a couple of years later, I moved there. The course turned out to be completely not for me and I do something else now. But have been in the same country for 7-8 years. Wondering what life would be like if I wasn't clicking around on some gaming forum around 10 years ago. I was at a summer camp and didn't like the food there, so I faked a stomachache. A girl came to ask if I was okay. Now she is one of my best friends. A few days later I was talking to her about weeaboo stuff. And a guy overheard us and joined us. He is now my boyfriend. Most of their friends are now my friends too, so I wouldn't have any social life at all if I finished eating my food in silence. My mom died of a sudden brain aneurysm a month before my 13th birthday. My dad didn't know what to get me as a present. So he got me like 6 prepaid horseback riding lessons at a local barn despite me never having really ridden before and having a non-horsey family. Yeah. I'm now 30, I'm a multiple world champion equestrian. And I own a ranch and 8 horses. There is a whole lot of stuff in between. But if my mom hadn't have died that day at work, I imagine my entire life would be different. Got accepted into UCLA for microbiology for the spring. I wanted to finish my volunteer hours at the hospital before going. I got assigned to the lab, mostly just filing paperwork. The microbiologists in the lab didn't study microbiology, they studied clinical laboratory science. So I withdrew from UCLA and went to a smaller California State University that offered that major and became a CLS. Got involved with a professional Facebook group for CLSs. Saw this girl with the same last name with me. She was a student. She hit me up asking me for help since I seemed to be answering people's questions on that group. After a month I flew out across the country to meet her. We stayed in the hotel for a week and did nothing but duck. Now we're married with a kid. I probably wouldn't have met her if I didn't finish my volunteer hours. Or got placed in another department. Or went to UCLA for microbiology. Which I would have most likely ended up in research or manufacturing. Instead of medical clinical lab. Plot twist, I dabbled in micro for a while. But fell in love with blood banking and transfusion. Currently I'm in med school. But I'll never forget the fun I had in the lab. When I was a kid my parents had a pretty good life for themselves in Mexico. Then they got caught up in this sounds too good to be true pyramid scheme that was too good to be true. They pretty much lost everything. All their savings. Their house, and there were a few people that were pissed at them for getting them involved in that scheme. One woman in particular became obsessed with my mom. Calling all the time. Leaving threatening notes at the door. And even showing up at places we were going. My parents started to worry that she might try to do something to harm me. So they decided to move to the US. Far away from her and start over. Had my parents not gotten involved in that pyramid scheme. Which got that crazy lady after them. Causing them to pack up and move to another country. My life could be so much different right now. I often wonder how things would have been for me if I had grown up in Mexico instead of Chicago. When I was in college, my friend wanted to go out to party. We went out a lot in college and I wasn't in the mood to go, but after going at it back and forth I decided to go last minute. Met a girl at that party. Got her number. Eventually she became my girlfriend after a year. Completely changed my life. Life's weird. Always go to the college party. My ex and I hadn't talked in years. Having lived across the country from each other and dating other people in the meantime. There was a point where we were both single and mutual feelings were still there, so we decided to give it a try again. Things went horrible. But it was one of those situations where those what if feelings would have always been there had we not tried. I mean, we're talking like 10 years of history at this point. Anyways, I was in my hometown, where he lived, visiting, and he ended things. But asked me to stay in town for another day. I stayed. Didn't hear from him at all that next day and was hurt. But it showed me how toxic our relationship had become. So that night I went to my best friend's house to say goodbye. Because I wouldn't be back in town until later in the year. I told her that after all those years of being hung up on one person, I was finally ready to move on. Her response? But there's someone we want you to meet. They invited said person over. I'd never met or heard of him. Flash forward 2 years, him and I are still together. About to move across the country with our 2 pups. If I hadn't been dumb enough to stay that extra night, I don't think I would have gotten fed up enough to tell myself that I deserved better, and I would have never been around to meet the love of my life. There are so many more dominoes that fell into place to get me to be there that night. But the biggest heartbreak of my life brought me the best thing that ever happened to me. I always think about how I nearly missed meeting my husband if my choices had been slightly different. I went to university. And they had enrolled me on the wrong course. I left my tiny town to go to a big city 5 hours away. The course I had been enrolled on only lasted a year and I had no choice but to go back home. I went home. My asshole mother told me I had a week to find a job or duck off. So I found a job as a carer. Had never done this in my life. It was a quick job with a quick start, and still ducked off. This care job meant I lived with people who needed 24-hour care for weeks on end. I didn't do small stints because I didn't have a car. The last lady I was with had passed away and they needed me to go to another who was just down the road from me. And didn't need a live-in. So it worked well. I'd sit with her for 8 hours a day. I remember laughing at her last name because it was just odd. Little did I know 5 years later I'd be marrying her grandson and gaining the weird name lol. A good friend of mine is only alive today because I sat down with him at a party and we got drunk together. I'd never met him before and I don't know. Just sat down with him and cracked open a beer. Turns out he'd recently lost his father too and we bonded over the meaninglessness of existence. Years later he told me he'd planned to kill himself until I'd said nothing matters as long as you have beer and good company. 17 years later we're still here. Switching my spring sport from t-ball to lacrosse all the way back in 1st grade. I found the college I will be attending this fall through lacrosse recruitment. I never would have heard about this school otherwise. It's a small school that's 10 hours away from my hometown and I am absolutely thrilled to be going there. I quit my security supervisor job because I got a job at a casino. The casino laid me off due to the expansion not happening. Needed a quick job. So I went to my former employer to see if I could get any security post. As I went in the door, a guy was being escorted out by my former boss. I asked him if I could get a job and he said that I could have my former position started right now. The guy he was throwing out was my replacement and was being fired for stealing Twinkies from the production line at the Hostess plant where we had a security guard contract. My new first assignment was a bank escort for a manager at a branch office for a large company. After a few months, he told me about an entry-level management job and he helped me get it. I still work at the company and I have just started my 23 year. I will probably retire in just 5 more years. Now the reason I work security at all though was because I had a pen with me one day. I went to the local mall to apply for jobs after high school. I stopped at the security office first and they needed a dispatcher. They had a rule that you could only apply if you had your own pen. Shows planning or something like that. I had a pen and I got the job. First job I ever applied for I got because I had pen. Since I had security work experience it led to security jobs all through college. So having the pen put in the right place for when the guy stole the Twinkies. I KonMari'd my home and had a bunch of stuff to take to the car. Did not want to take multiple trips so I carried everything down at once. Fell down the stairs and bruised my tailbone. Thus altered my gait and now I have low back pain which referred up to my shoulders. I wake up in pain and had to purchase a new mattress as well as start seeing a physical therapist. Not a very exciting story. My ex cheated on me big time. So to see her Instagram profile after we broke up, I created an Instagram account and would usually go through her pictures and stuff. I missed her. While scrolling on the app, I saw a witty comment and thought it was hilarious. I DM'd this girl off an Instagram comment. We started talking. We decided to meet after speaking for a month or so. We instantly clicked. We are about to complete 2 years together this May. Best relationship of my life. I was at Lollapalooza in Chicago in 2012. It was the summer before my sophomore year of college. It started to rain so much that we had to evacuate the park for a couple of hours. They were going to text us or something when it was back on. I ran into someone from my college. We had gone to one EDM concert during my freshman year where we hung out all night but we didn't exchange numbers. I ran into him on a random street in Chicago and we exchanged numbers. A couple weeks later we went to an EDM festival together. Then during my sophomore and junior years we went to a lot of EDM concerts together. Him and I and his high school friends. It was a super fun period of time in my life. Though sadly in June 2014 he decided to ghost me for an EDM festival and we had a falling out. He had moved away from campus to Chicago and I feel like he had decided during his senior year, he is a year older than me, that he wanted to cut ties with college friends. But I am grateful for all of the other good times we had. I was in NIC for work and staying in Lower Manhattan. But just felt like it was too far from work, that's all I was there for. I was too busy for anything fun. Plus I've been to NIC numerous times before. So one night I just decided to move hotels closer to the office. The next morning in the new hotel I overslept and didn't wake up until about 9 AM. I made the switch on the evening of the 10th of September, 2001 and had been staying at the Marriott World Trade Center. I had a summer internship lined up in another state. The month before. The internship fell through and I no longer had any summer plans. I found a last-minute internship in the city I lived in. Right before summer vacation started. My boyfriend broke up with me, leaving me devastated. At my internship, my co-worker turned me to Bumble, which I had always said I would never use. I tried it for fun to get me through the summer and planned to delete the app before school started. There were 2 weeks of summer vacation left and I matched with a guy. We had a drink and hit it off. At that time he was ready to give up and stop online dating altogether. 4 years later we're still dating and about to move in together. A friend who worked in Madrid. As she got to the train station the strap on her shoe broke so she only lived 10 minutes away and went home for different shoes. In the 20 or so minutes it took her to go there, grab shoes and go back again. 193 people died and 2,000 were injured in Goms, including on the train she would have got on. My dad was completely in love with a lady called Carol. He had moved from a nearby city to her small town to live and be with her and was soon going to propose. Then, one day, Carol crashed her motorcycle and died instantly. My dad didn't leave the town he was new to. He stayed, grieved, worked, settled and eventually met my mum there. Carol's hometown is my hometown. And I am only here because she was. And then wasn't. My dad made me promise as a child that I'd never set foot on a motorcycle, and even though I don't believe them to be the death machines that he insisted they were, and even though he's no longer with me, I will keep that promise. For Carol. Didn't happen to me but to my ancestors. Like my mother, grandparents possibly. They were late for a ship they were supposed to be on, so they were unable to board. It ended up sinking. Had they not missed the boat, I wouldn't be here. Not me but my work partner. We work M's. He locked his keys in his car and a couple guys spent about 30 minutes trying to get to it. We logged on about 10 minutes late due to it. Well, our first call was a lady who wanted to go to a hospital 30 minutes away, where my partner's wife worked. But she wasn't working that day and was out and about and happened to be in the vicinity of her work with his keys. She had to use them because she locked herself out of her car and the ring has the sets. If we didn't log on late, we never would have gotten the call to go to that far away hospital. We never would have gotten his wife to meet us. No keys. Not a crazy story but still interesting.